Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back to the bustling streets of ancient Rome. Imagine, if you will, the first hint of pre dawn light barely kissing the cobblestones, a whisper of a breeze carrying the scent of wood smoke, and something undeniably delicious. You're trudging along a narrow alleyway, the kind that probably smelled of, well, let's just say, history, and leave it at that. The city is still mostly asleep, a collective sigh before the day's cacophony begins. But ahead, a warm, golden glow spills from a doorway. This isn't a grand basilica or a senator's villa. This is a Roman pistrinum, a baker's shop, already stirring with the promise of fresh bread. And let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive a day here without tripping over a stray chicken or getting splashed by an overflowing water cart. But tonight, we're just observing, safely tucked into our modern beds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Maybe someone out there is listening from an actual bakery, which would be delightfully meta. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand outside the cool morning air, a gentle contrast to the rising warmth within. The sounds are muffled at first, a low hum of activity, the soft scuff of sandals on stone, perhaps a quiet grunt of effort. This isn't the Rome of gladiatorial contests or grand triumphal parades. This is the Rome of everyday sustenance, the unsung hero of the morning, the baker. Most Romans, unless they were incredibly wealthy, didn't have ovens in their homes. Imagine that for a moment. No popping a frozen pizza in after a long day. No impromptu cookie cravings satisfied. If you wanted bread, good bread, fresh bread, you relied on your local baker. This reliance shaped the very rhythm of Roman life, ensuring that the pistrinum was one of the earliest establishments to stir. As your eyes adjust, you notice the shop is probably open to the street, a common design for Roman businesses, allowing passersby to see and smell the goods. No fancy glass windows here, just a practical opening, sometimes with a counter extending outwards. The air is already thick with the comforting aroma of wood smoke, and subtly at first, the unmistakable scent of yeasty dough. It's a scent that transcends millennia, a primal olfactory signal that something delicious is being created. You can almost feel the gentle warmth radiating from within, a beacon in the cool, pre-dawn quiet. Historians still argue whether some bakeries also functioned as mill houses, grinding their own grain on site, or if most received pre-milled flour. Our baker, let's call him Lucius, seems to be a man who prefers to control his own destiny, or at least his own flour. He likely purchased large quantities of wheat, probably from the public grain dole or from private suppliers who brought it in from the fertile lands of Sicily or Egypt, the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. This grain wouldn't arrive as fine white flour. Oh no, that would be far too easy. It arrived as whole grains, often still in their husks, demanding significant effort before they could even consider becoming a fluffy loaf. It's a reminder that convenience, as we know it, was still a few thousand years off. You'd certainly appreciate your modern supermarket bread a bit more after witnessing this. The faint sounds of rustling sacks and the rhythmic creak of something heavy suggest the next crucial step is already underway, well before the sun properly climbs the sky. The muffled sounds you heard earlier are now becoming clearer, taking on a specific, laborious rhythm. Inside the baker's shop, you can now see the source, the millstone. This isn't a gentle, electric hum. This is the weighty, grinding reality of turning grain into flour. Imagine a large, rough stone, often made of volcanic rock like basalt, sitting atop another, stationary stone. Wheat kernels are poured into a central hole in the upper stone, and then, through sheer human or animal power, that upper stone is rotated. You might see a donkey or a mule hitched to a wooden beam, walking in a slow, continuous circle, their patient plodding providing the necessary force. Sometimes, if the baker couldn't afford an animal, or for smaller batches, it would be human, slaves, or even the bakers themselves, pushing and pulling. It's hard work, mind-numbingly repetitive, and incredibly dusty. As the stones turn, the grain is crushed between them, slowly but surely transforming into a coarse, gritty flour that spills out from the edges. You can practically taste the dust in the air, a fine powder that settles on everything and everyone. Our baker, Lucius, probably has a few dedicated mill workers, or perhaps, if he's a smaller operation, it's just him and his apprentices taking turns. This isn't just about making flour, it's about making enough flour day in and day out to feed a significant portion of the neighborhood. A truly surprising fact about Roman mills is that some of the more advanced ones, especially later in the empire, were water powered. Imagine the efficiency of a Roman water mill, a marvel of ancient engineering, churning out flour while others still relied on animal muscle. Historians still argue whether water mills were widespread enough in early Rome to significantly impact the daily operations of most smaller bakeries, or if they remained more of a specialized industrial application. For Lucius, here in this bustling pre-dawn shop, the odds are it's still the reliable, if somewhat grumpy, donkey. The air quality in this part of the shop is robust. If you've ever walked into a flour mill today, you know that fine dust gets everywhere. In ancient Rome, without modern ventilation systems, this flour dust was a constant companion. It coated clothes, clung to hair, and undoubtedly made for a very dry throat. You might even catch a glimpse of someone tying a cloth loosely over their mouth and nose, an ancient dust mask, perhaps, though far from perfect. It's a humble detail, but it speaks volumes about the sheer physical toll of this profession. And you thought your morning commute was tough? Try breathing flour for 8 hours. The ground flour isn't immediately ready for bread making either. It's a mix of coarse and fine particles, and crucially, it still contains bran and germ. To make the whiter, more desirable bread, it would need to be sifted. This leads to another stage of manual labor, sifting. Imagine large sieves, sometimes made of horsehair or linen, through which the flour would be vigorously shaken. The finer flour would fall through, while the coarser bits and bran would remain. The whitest bread was often the most expensive and sought after, a symbol of status, almost like ordering the extra virgin olive oil of the bread world. Lucius, ever the savvy businessman, probably offered different grades of bread, from the common, dark, wholemeal loaf to the lighter, more refined white bread, each requiring varying degrees of milling and sifting. It's a subtle hierarchy, even in something as fundamental as bread, reflecting the stratified nature of Roman society itself. And if you think about it, making bread was quite the industrial process, albeit on a micro scale, right here in the heart of the city. No wonder bakers were such an integral part of the Roman urban fabric. They weren't just cooks, they were millers, processors, and essential providers, with the flour finely milled and sifted to varying degrees of fineness. The true magic, or at least the true alchemy of baking, can begin. You watch as large wooden troughs are brought out, perhaps scrubbed clean from yesterday's efforts, and the fresh flour is carefully measured into them. This isn't just a handful here and there. We're talking about substantial quantities, enough to produce loaves for dozens, if not hundreds, of customers throughout the day. Water, likely drawn from a public fountain nearby or a well within the pastrinum itself, is added incrementally. This is where the baker's experience truly comes into play. Too much water, and the dough will be sloppy. Too little, and it will be stiff and unworkable. It's a delicate balance, achieved through years of practice and an innate feel for the ingredients. But it's not just flour and water. The Romans also used salt, a crucial ingredient not only for flavor, but also for strengthening the gluten in the dough. And here's where a quirky tidbit comes in. For leavened bread, they didn't have commercial yeast packets like we do. Instead, they relied on natural ferments. Often, this meant using a bit of old dough saved from the previous day's batch, a sourdough starter essentially. This mother dough, as it's sometimes called, would be alive with wild yeasts and bacteria, ready to kickstart the fermentation process in the new mixture. Imagine the aroma of that starter, a complex, slightly sour, yet undeniably appealing scent, the true heart of their bread. Sometimes they might also use barm from beer brewing, if a brewery was nearby and accessible. It's a beautifully circular system, relying on the natural processes around them. Historians still argue whether different regions of the Roman Empire developed distinct bread styles based on their local wild yeast strains. Much like sourdough traditions today, you watch as the ingredients are combined. The baker, Lucius, plunging his hands into the mix, kneading with a strength and rhythm that speaks of deep familiarity. This isn't a gentle, polite folding. This is serious, muscular work. He pushes, pulls, stretches, and folds the dough, developing the gluten that will give the bread its structure and chewiness. The air in the mixing area is cooler than near the ovens, but still thick with the earthy smell of raw dough and the subtle tang of the starter. It's almost hypnotic to watch the transformation from a dusty pile of flour into a cohesive, elastic mass. You might even hear the rhythmic slap, slap, slap of the dough against the wooden trough, a sound that, surprisingly, can be quite soothing in its predictability. The dough will be kneaded until it reaches the desired consistency, smooth and pliable, but not sticky. This process could take a significant amount of time, especially for larger batches. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of a gym workout, but with a delicious, carby reward at the end. No need for a fancy smoothie afterward, just the satisfaction of knowing you've just created the foundation for the day's sustenance. And just when you think you've got the hang of it, you realize Lucius is probably doing this multiple times a day, perhaps with different types of dough for various breads. It's a masterclass in efficiency born of necessity. You might even catch a glimpse of an apprentice, younger and less experienced, struggling a bit with their own smaller batch, their movements more hesitant, their dough a little less cooperative. It's a reminder that even in ancient trades, there was a hierarchy of skill and the constant process of learning. Once the kneading is complete and the dough possesses that satisfying elasticity, it's time for the crucial, almost magical step: fermentation, or as we might call it today, the rise. You watch as Lucius, or one of his more experienced apprentices, carefully transfers the enormous lumps of dough into large wooden bowls or even more troughs. These aren't just left out in the open, they're often covered with linen cloths to prevent a crust from forming and to keep the precious moisture in. The ambient temperature of the baker's shop, warmed by the simmering braziers and the distant heat from the unlit ovens, is actually quite conducive to this process. It's a delicate balance: too cold, and the yeast won't activate; too hot, and it might overproof too quickly, resulting in a dense, crumbly loaf. This period of rising is where the wild yeasts, so carefully cultivated in the starter dough, truly begin their work. They feast on the sugars in the flour, producing carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct. It's this gas that gets trapped within the gluten network of the dough, causing it to inflate and become light and airy. You can almost feel the silent, microscopic activity happening within those covered bowls, a slow, patient expansion. For the ancient Romans, this wasn't just a chemical process. It was probably seen with a degree of wonder, the dough literally coming alive under their care. It's a subtle example of how daily life intertwined with the natural forces without the benefit of modern scientific explanation. And you thought your sourdough starter was high maintenance. Imagine relying on it every single day to feed a city. Quirky detail about Roman fermentation is that while they understood the result of leavening, the exact science was, of course, unknown. They knew that old dough worked and that heat helped. Sometimes they might even add ingredients like bean flour or honey to aid fermentation, as these could provide extra sugars for the yeast to consume or act as a catalyst in some way. It's an empirical knowledge passed down through generations of bakers, honed by trial and error. Historians still argue whether there was a Roman equivalent of a master baker's secret recipe passed down orally, perhaps involving specific temperatures or unique starter compositions, or if basic methods were widely disseminated. Either way, the slow, patient rise was paramount. As the hours tick by in the pre-dawn darkness, the dough slowly, inexorably doubles in size. This isn't a quick process. It can take several hours, especially if the shop is on the cooler side, or if the starter isn't particularly vigorous. This is why the bakers had to start so incredibly early. The rising dough dictates the rhythm of their day. While one batch rises, other tasks can be undertaken, like preparing the ingredients for the next batch, or perhaps, if the shop is particularly large, milling more grain. You might see an apprentice occasionally peeking under the cloth, checking the progress, a small smile of satisfaction crossing their face as they see the dough puffing up nicely. It's a tangible sign of success, the promise of delicious bread to come. The silence of this stage is almost as remarkable as the sounds of the previous ones. The rhythmic grinding has stopped. The vigorous kneading has ceased. Now it's just the quiet hum of natural processes, the soft, barely perceptible sighs of the expanding dough. It's a moment of respite in the baker's demanding day, a pause before the next burst of intense activity. You might even find yourself feeling a little drowsy just watching it, the quiet patience of the fermentation, a perfect counterpoint to the bustling world outside. It's a reminder that good things, like good bread, often take time and a gentle, natural process. As the dough patiently swells, a new kind of warmth begins to permeate the pastrinum. This isn't the gentle, ambient heat from the fermentation. This is a more intense, deliberate warmth emanating from the back of the shop. The ovens are being fired up. Imagine stepping towards them, feeling the heat increase steadily, a dry, almost ancient warmth that speaks of primal cooking. Roman bakeries were equipped with large, purpose built ovens, often constructed from a brick or stone, with thick walls designed to retain heat for long periods. They weren't your typical kitchen range. These were industrial scale beasts, capable of baking dozens, if not hundreds, of loaves at a time. You watch as the baker's assistants, perhaps younger apprentices or enslaved laborers, shovel in bundles of wood. Not just any wood, but specific types chosen for their clean burn and sustained heat. Oak, olive, or even pine could have been used, depending on local availability. The wood is ignited, and soon a roaring fire fills the oven's chamber. Flames leap and dance, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the crackle and pop of burning wood becomes the dominant sound. The heat quickly builds, transforming the oven's interior into a glowing cavern. This process, known as firing the oven, was critical. Too hot, and the bread would burn. Not hot enough, and it would be dense and undercooked. It required a keen eye and years of experience to judge the temperature solely by the color of the heated stones and the feel of the radiant heat. A fascinating, albeit slightly gross, tidbit about Roman oven maintenance is that sometimes, after the initial firing and before the bread went in, they might use a damp cloth on a long pole to wipe down the oven floor. This wasn't just for cleaning. The steam created by the water hitting the hot stone could contribute to a crisper crust on the bread. It's a small detail, but it shows an understanding of subtle baking physics that far predates modern science. Historians still argue whether the exact temperature for different types of Roman bread varied significantly across regions, or if a standard baker's heat was broadly understood. As the wood burns down to coals, the intense heat is absorbed by the oven's stone walls and floor. The fire is eventually raked out, and the oven is left to soak in its own accumulated heat. You might see the baker testing the temperature by tossing a pinch of flour onto the oven floor. If it browned quickly, it was ready. If it burst into flames, it was too hot and needed to cool slightly. This whole ritual, from lighting the fire to judging the residual heat, was a skilled art form passed down through generations. Imagine the baker, Lucius, peering into the fiery maw, his face illuminated by the orange glow, a picture of ancient expertise. The smoke, initially thick and acrid, now dissipates, leaving behind the clean, dry heat of the thoroughly warmed oven. This is the perfect environment for baking, a consistent, radiating warmth that will cook the bread evenly and create that desirable golden crust. The tools of the trade are visible now. Long-handled peels, wooden shovels used to slide loaves in and out of the oven, and perhaps metal rakes for managing the embers. There's a certain primal satisfaction in watching this process, understanding that the very act of cooking bread over fire has connected humanity for millennia. It's a testament to the enduring simplicity and effectiveness of ancient technology, proving that sometimes the old ways are truly the best ways for something as fundamental as a perfect loaf. With the colossal oven now radiating a perfect, steady heat, the focus shifts back to the dough, which by this point has surely achieved its glorious, pillowy rise. You observe the bakers, perhaps Lucius himself, or a particularly skilled apprentice, preparing to transform these amorphous lumps into recognizable loaves. This is where the artistry of the baker, however humble, truly comes into play, shaping the loaves. The large fermented dough masses are carefully transferred from their rising troughs onto a dusted work surface, often a large wooden table. Here, the bakers will deftly divide the dough. They don't have precise scales for each individual loaf like a modern bakery might. Instead, they rely on an incredible sense of touch and visual estimation, quickly judging the correct weight for each piece. Imagine the speed and confidence of their hands, tearing or cutting the dough with practiced ease. This division ensures that all the loaves in a batch will bake evenly and be roughly the same size, an important detail for consistent production. Once divided, each portion of dough is then skillfully shaped. The most common shape for Roman bread, and one that is still visible in archaeological finds from Pompeii, is the round, flattened loaf, often scored into 8 segments before baking. Think of it like a giant, rustic focaccia, but thicker. These scores weren't just decorative, they helped the bread bake more evenly and made it easier to break into portions without needing a knife. A truly quirky detail is that some loaves from Pompeii even have the baker's stamp imprinted on them, like an ancient brand, identifying the pistrinum and ensuring quality control. It's like their version of a baked by sticker, but far more enduring. Historians still argue whether these stamps were primarily for quality assurance, for tax purposes, or simply a form of ancient advertising. Beyond the classic round loaf, Roman bakers produced a variety of shapes. You might see longer, oval-shaped loaves, or even small, individual rolls. Some breads were specifically shaped for particular occasions, or even for specific dietary needs, perhaps a denser, more nutrient-rich bread for laborers, or a finer, softer loaf for wealthier patrons. The shaping process is surprisingly quick and efficient, a blur of practiced movements as hands pat, fold, and tuck the dough. You might even see an apprentice struggling a bit, their loaf looking slightly less uniform, a testament to the years of training required to achieve the master's touch. The surface of some loaves might be brushed with water or dusted with flour before baking, little tricks to influence the crust. Others might have seeds pressed into them, perhaps poppy seeds or sesame, if the customer was looking for something a bit fancier. These simple additions could elevate a basic loaf into something more special. The air in this part of the shop is still warm, filled with the comforting smell of raw dough and the promise of baked goodness. It's a quieter phase than the milling or kneading, more focused on precision and presentation. Each loaf, even the most basic, is a small work of art shaped by human hands, ready to be transformed by the heat of the oven. It's a reminder that even in the seemingly mundane task of making bread, there was a deep connection to craft and skill, a direct link between the baker's hands and the hungry mouths of Rome. With the loaves now perfectly shaped, round and segmented, or perhaps elongated and plain, it's time for the culmination of all that meticulous preparation, actually baking the bread. You can feel the anticipation in the air of the pistrinum, a quiet hum of expectation as the moment draws near. The large stone oven, having absorbed the intense heat from the earlier wood firing, is now a glowing cavern of sustained warmth, the perfect environment for transforming raw dough into golden, crusty loaves. The baker, Lucius, or his most trusted assistant, will stand ready with the long-handled wooden peel, that indispensable tool of the ancient baker. One by one, the shaped loaves are carefully slid onto the wide, flat end of the peel. It's a graceful, practiced movement, a gentle slide that ensures the delicate dough isn't disturbed before it meets the intense heat. You might even hear a soft thump as the dough settles onto the hot stone floor of the oven. This isn't a job for the clumsy. A misplaced loaf could stick or burn unevenly. As the first few loaves enter the oven's fiery embrace, you can almost hear a faint sizzle as the moisture in the dough hits the searing hot stone. This immediate burst of heat is crucial. It causes a rapid expansion of the gases within the dough, giving the bread its final glorious rise, known as oven spring. The aroma in the shop intensifies immediately, shifting from the earthy scent of raw dough to the rich, unmistakable fragrance of baking bread. It's a scent that has no equal, a primal olfactory signal of comfort and sustenance that has wafted through human settlements for millennia. The baking process itself is a delicate dance between heat and time. The baker knows precisely how long each type of loaf needs. Too short, and the bread will be raw and doughy inside. Too long, and it will be dry and burnt. They likely didn't have mechanical timers, relying instead on their internal clock, the color of the crust, and perhaps the sound the bread made when tapped. A quirky detail often overlooked is how they managed to keep track of multiple batches in a large oven. Bakers might have had specific spots in the oven for different loaves, or perhaps rotated them with incredible efficiency to ensure even baking Historians still argue whether some bakeries employed a simple system of marking loaves, perhaps with a small indentation, to distinguish customer orders or different types of bread within the same bake. As the baking progresses, you watch the loaves slowly transform, their pale, doughy exteriors deepen to a rich golden brown, sometimes developing beautiful crackled crusts. The segments on the round loaves become more pronounced, splitting slightly as the bread expands. Steam, escaping from the loaves, creates that wonderful, slightly chewy interior. The shop, which was once cool and quiet in the pre-dawn hours, is now a bustling, warm hub, alive with the sounds of the oven, the rhythmic movements of the bakers, and the intoxicating smell of freshly baked bread. It's a symphony of senses, all culminating in the creation of Rome's most essential food. The baker, Lucius, stands by, his face gleaming with sweat, his eyes constantly scanning the loaves. A true master orchestrating this daily culinary masterpiece. The delicious aroma of baking bread fills every corner of the pistrinum. The early morning quiet begins to fade, replaced by a growing murmur of activity from outside. You notice the light outside is now brighter, the sun just beginning to properly clear the horizon, casting longer shadows down the narrow Roman streets. This shift in the ambient light signals the next, equally crucial phase of the baker's day, selling the wares. The doors, or rather, the open entrance to the shop, are now fully inviting, and you start to see the first customers arriving. These aren't just casual strollers. Many are likely early risers, slaves sent by their masters, or hungry laborers heading to their day's work. The demand for fresh bread in ancient Rome was immense and constant, making the baker's shop a vital hub of daily commerce. You might see a woman carrying a small basket, ready to collect the day's loaves for her family, or a soldier, still half asleep, quickly grabbing a roll before his duties begin. The baker, Lucius, now transitions from oven master to shopkeeper, his demeanor shifting slightly from intense focus to a more welcoming, albeit still efficient, presence. The hot, golden loaves are being carefully removed from the oven, with the long peels then transferred to cooling racks or sturdy wooden tables near the front of the shop. Imagine the sheer volume of bread being brought out, basket after basket, each exuding that irresistible warmth and smell. It's a sensory overload in the best possible way. A quirky observation here is that ancient Roman bakeries often didn't have elaborate display cases. The bread was the display, piled high and steaming, its freshness its own best advertisement. The transactions themselves would have been straightforward. Customers would approach, indicate how many loaves or what type they wanted, and pay with small bronze coins, or perhaps even in kind. Though cash transactions were common, there wouldn't be much haggling over prices, as bread was a fundamental necessity, and prices were likely somewhat regulated, or at least well known. You might even see a quick exchange of banter, a familiar greeting between Lucius and a regular customer, highlighting the community aspect of these shops. Historians still argue whether Roman bakers sometimes extended credit to their regular customers, or if all transactions were strictly cash on the spot. The morning rush is a symphony of soft murmurs, the clink of coins, and the rustle of linen as loaves are wrapped or placed into baskets. The scent of fresh bread hangs thick in the air, a delicious cloud that must have drawn people in from blocks away. It's a testament to the fact that even without modern advertising or sophisticated marketing, a good product, consistently delivered, spoke for itself. And the bread wasn't just for human consumption. You might even spot a stray dog, tail wagging, hopefully eyeing any dropped crumbs, adding a touch of casual Roman street life to the scene. This vibrant morning exchange is a core part of the daily life of a Roman baker, a continuous cycle of creation and consumption that kept the mighty city fed, one loaf at a time. It's truly incredible to think of how many lives revolved around this simple yet profoundly essential daily commodity. While the classic round loaf was undoubtedly the star of the show, a Roman baker's shop offered far more than just basic bread. As the morning rush continues, you notice that Lucius and his team also produce a delightful array of other baked goods and savory treats. This isn't just a bread factory, it's a sort of ancient deli catering to a range of tastes and needs. You might spot small flatbreads, perhaps similar to what we know as focaccia, sometimes studded with herbs like oregano or thyme or even a sprinkle of cheese. These would have been perfect for a quick, portable meal, perhaps enjoyed with a dollop of olives or a bit of cured meat. Then there are the sweeter options, though not overly sugary by modern standards. Roman bakers sometimes made honey cakes or placenta cakes, which were layers of dough, often with a ricotta like cheese and honey, baked until golden. Imagine the subtly sweet aroma, a delightful contrast to the yeasty scent of the bread. It's like their version of a cheesecake without the refrigeration. Historians still argue whether some of these more elaborate pastries were reserved for special occasions or if they were commonly available daily for those who could afford a small luxury. Beyond the sweet and savory, Roman bakers also produced hardtack or biscuits, durable loaves that were baked multiple times to remove all moisture. These weren't exactly delicious, but they were incredibly practical. Think of them as the ancient world's granola bars, perfect for soldiers on campaign, sailors on long voyages, or travelers needing non perishable provisions. They could last for weeks, even months, a testament to Roman ingenuity in food preservation. A quirky tidbit is that these biscuits were often so hard they needed to be dipped in wine or water to make them palatable. So, while you might appreciate their historical significance, you probably wouldn't want one for your midnight snack. You might also see evidence of liba, small sacrificial cakes, often offered to household gods or during religious ceremonies. These weren't necessarily for daily consumption, but would have been an occasional, important part of the baker's repertoire, showcasing their versatility. The tools for these specialized items would be slightly different too. Smaller molds for cakes, perhaps flatter trays for biscuits. It's a testament to the fact that even in a highly specialized trade, there was room for diversity and catering to a broader market. The variety offered in a Roman bakery highlights the multifaceted nature of Roman culinary life. It wasn't just about subsistence, it was also about celebrating flavor, convenience, and tradition. Lucius, our diligent baker, isn't just churning out loaves. He's providing an essential service that encompasses both the everyday and the occasional indulgence. You can almost picture a Roman child eyeing a honey cake with the same longing a modern child eyes a cupcake. It's a timeless desire for something sweet and comforting, even across 2 millennia. The bustling morning scene at the bakery, therefore, isn't just about bread. It's a vibrant snapshot of Roman life, complete with its necessities and its small, delectable pleasures. The role of the baker in Roman society extended far beyond simply churning out loaves. In many ways, the baker's social status was surprisingly significant, especially in a city as reliant on bread as Rome. You might assume that a baker working with flour and fire would be considered a humble tradesman, but that's not entirely the case. They occupied a respected position within the Roman urban landscape. For one, bakers, known as pistores, were often freedmen, former slaves who had gained their freedom and established a successful trade. Many became quite wealthy through their enterprises, owning multiple ovens, employing numerous workers, and accumulating property. Their success was a testament to their skill and the essential nature of their service. Imagine Lucius, our baker, no longer just a humble artisan, but a burgeoning businessman, perhaps even a local dignitary, sponsoring small public works or contributing to local festivals. This ascent from servitude to prosperity was a powerful symbol in Roman society, highlighting the potential for social mobility even in a highly stratified system. A mainstream historical fact is that bakers were organized into guilds or collegia. These were not just social clubs, they were powerful associations that protected the interests of their members, regulated trade practices, and even played a role in city administration. These guilds ensured quality control, managed the supply of grain, and provided a sense of community and mutual support among bakers. It's like an ancient union, but with more toga parties. Historians still argue whether these guilds primarily served to protect the economic interests of their members, or if they also played a significant role in maintaining public order and loyalty to the state by ensuring a consistent bread supply. A quirky detail is that during times of grain shortages or public unrest, bakers could sometimes be granted special privileges or exemptions by the state to ensure the continued production of bread. They were seen as essential to public order, a kind of ancient food security force. Imagine being considered so vital that the emperor himself would offer you tax breaks just to keep the bread flowing. It underscores how much the Roman state understood the direct link between a full stomach and a peaceful populace. Bread wasn't just food, it was political stability. You might even see evidence of a baker's prosperity in their home attached to the shop or in the quality of their attire, even if dusted with flour. While not senators, they weren't at the bottom of the social ladder either. Their crucial role in feeding the masses gave them a certain leverage and respect that many other tradesmen might not have enjoyed. The baker was a cornerstone of the community, often a familiar face, a dependable presence. This elevated status also meant they were responsible for maintaining the quality and consistency of their product, as any failure could lead to public discontent. It's a good reminder that even the most seemingly mundane professions can hold significant power and influence within the intricate tapestry of a civilization. Even with their respectable status, daily life for a Roman baker was far from easy. You've seen the early starts, the heavy labor, the constant heat and dust. These challenges and hazards were an inherent part of the job, making it a demanding profession that required significant physical stamina and mental fortitude. One of the most obvious hazards was the heat and smoke from the massive ovens. Imagine working for hours on end, day after day, in an environment that often reached scorching temperatures. The air would have been thick with wood smoke, especially during the initial firing, which would have irritated lungs and eyes. Bakers and their assistants likely suffered from chronic respiratory issues, far more than your average Roman citizen, a silent toll paid for feeding the city. You might even notice Lucius occasionally wiping sweat from his brow, his clothes smudged with soot and flour, a testament to the constant exertion. Then there was the sheer physical labor, milling grain, kneading enormous batches of dough, shoveling wood, and moving heavy loaves. This was back-breaking work. There were no electric mixers or conveyor belts. Every step of the process relied on human muscle, often for hours on end. Accidents were probably common: burns from the hot oven, strains from lifting heavy sacks of grain, cuts from sharp tools. It truly makes you appreciate the ease with which we acquire our daily bread today. A quirky observation is that, despite the physical demands, the Roman military sometimes employed bakers directly, recognizing their essential skill and the need for fresh bread for troops on the move. They'd essentially bring the bakery to the battlefield. Historians still argue whether military bakers received special training or if they were simply civilian bakers conscripted into service. Another significant challenge was the constant threat of fire. Bakeries, with their wood-fired ovens and abundant combustible flour dust, were inherently dangerous. A stray spark, a mismanaged ember, and an entire pistrinum could go up in flames, often taking neighboring wooden structures with it. This was a very real and terrifying concern in a city built largely of timber and packed densely with insula. Imagine the anxiety every baker must have felt, knowing their livelihood and potentially their home could be wiped out in an instant. Beyond the immediate physical dangers, there was the constant pressure of supply and demand. Bakers relied on a consistent supply of grain, which could be disrupted by bad harvests, political instability, or piracy on the seas. Any shortage meant a struggle to produce enough bread, leading to public discontent and potential fines or punishment from authorities. It was a high-stakes business where a bad crop thousands of miles away could directly impact your daily operations. You might even catch Lucius looking a little stressed on a day when grain shipments were delayed, his brow furrowed with concern. It's a vivid reminder that even in ancient times, the global supply chain, however rudimentary, was always a source of underlying tension for essential trades like baking. You've seen the essential round loaves and the occasional honey cakes, but the sheer diversity of ancient bread varieties consumed across Rome might surprise you. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all bread culture. Different ingredients, milling techniques, and even cultural influences led to a fascinating array of bread types, each with its own place in the Roman diet. At the very basic end of the spectrum, and likely the most common, was panis rusticus, or rustic bread. This was typically made from coarse, unsifted wholemeal flour, rich in bran, and baked into dense, hearty loaves. It was the staple for the working classes, gladiators, and soldiers, providing sustained energy for physical labor. It wasn't fancy, but it was incredibly nourishing, the ancient equivalent of your whole grain, artisanal health loaf, without the hefty price tag. You might even imagine the satisfying, slightly chewy texture and earthy flavor of this bread, a true sustenance food. Moving up the ladder of refinement, you'd find panis secundarius, or second grade bread. This would have been made from flour that was partially sifted, removing some of the coarser bran, but still retaining more nutrients than pure white flour. It was likely consumed by the middle classes, offering a slightly finer texture and lighter color than the rustic version. Think of it as the everyday sandwich bread of ancient Rome, perfectly respectable without being extravagant. A quirky detail is that wealthier Romans might even feed panis secundarius to their slaves, while they themselves enjoyed the finest white bread, highlighting the subtle social distinctions even in bread. Then there was the coveted panis candidus, or white bread, made from the finest, most extensively sifted flour. This was the luxury bread, the preferred choice of the elite. It would have been lighter in texture and paler in color, a symbol of status and wealth, much like highly refined grains are still seen in some cultures today. Producing this required more effort in milling and sifting, naturally driving up its price. Historians still argue whether the obsession with white bread contributed to nutritional deficiencies among the Roman elite, given that much of the nutritious bran and germ was removed. Beyond these main categories, there were regional specialties and breads made for specific purposes. Panis siligineus was a particularly fine white bread, sometimes flavored, a delicacy for the very wealthy. There were also breads made with different grains, though wheat was dominant. For example, some regions might have used barley for a coarser bread. You might even hear about bread made with spelt, an ancient grain, or a rustic type of bread made with millet. Each of these would have had its own unique texture, flavor, and culinary application. The Roman baker, therefore, wasn't just a producer, they were a culinary expert, understanding the nuances of different flours and their suitability for various breads, ensuring that a broad spectrum of tastes and social classes were catered to, all from the simple act of baking. As the sun climbs higher and the morning rush begins to dwindle, the intense pace inside Lucius's pastrinum starts to slow, transitioning into a different kind of rhythm. This is the evening wind down, a crucial period for cleaning, preparation, and readying the shop for another demanding day. You might imagine the air still warm and fragrant with lingering bread smells, but the frenetic energy from earlier has softened to a more meditative hum. The first order of business is often the cleaning of the milling equipment. Those massive millstones and wooden troughs, once caked with flour dust, now need meticulous attention. Apprentices, perhaps slightly less energetic than they were at dawn, would diligently sweep brush and scrape away residual flour, bran, and any other debris. This wasn't just for hygiene. Leaving old flour could attract pests and even contaminate the next batch. Imagine the fine powder still lingering in the air, catching the slanting afternoon light as they work. A quirky detail often overlooked is that Roman bakers would sometimes use bristle brushes made from animal hair or even small bunches of twigs to sweep out crevices, ensuring every last bit of flour was collected. Historians still argue whether sanitation standards in Roman bakeries were primarily driven by health concerns or simply the practical need to avoid attracting vermin and preserving ingredients. Next comes the oven maintenance. While the main baking was done, the massive oven still retained significant heat. Any remaining ash from the wood firing would be raked out, and the oven floor might be given a final sweep. This was also the time to inspect the oven for any cracks or damage that might have occurred during the intense heat of the day, ensuring it was ready for another pre-dawn firing. You might see Lucius himself or a senior baker carefully examining the interior, their faces lit by the dying embers, a contemplative silence settling over the workspace. Beyond the heavy-duty cleaning, there's the preparation for the next day. This might involve setting aside a portion of today's dough to serve as tomorrow's starter, carefully wrapping it in damp cloths to keep it alive and viable. New supplies of flour might be brought in and stored, ready for the next round of milling. Water containers would be refilled, and tools like peels and rakes would be cleaned and hung in their proper places. It's a meticulous, almost ritualistic process, ensuring continuity and efficiency. You might even catch a glimpse of an apprentice sharpening knives used for scoring loaves or repairing a damaged basket, small tasks that contribute to the smooth operation of the business. As evening deepens, the open front of the pistrinum might be secured with wooden shutters or a heavy curtain, turning the bustling public space into a private sanctuary. The sounds of the city outside would begin to quieten too, as people prepared for their own evening meals, many of which would feature the very bread baked in this shop. Lucius and his team, after a long and arduous day, would finally be able to rest, knowing they had fulfilled their vital role in keeping Rome fed. It's a peaceful end to a day of intense labor, a cycle that would begin anew with the first hint of light tomorrow and every day after. The enduring impact of Roman baking, and particularly the daily life within a pistrinum like Lucius's, stretches far beyond the mere consumption of bread in antiquity. It's a fascinating reflection on the legacy of the loaf, demonstrating how Roman innovations, habits, and even the simple act of baking continued to influence culinary practices and societal structures for centuries to come. Think about the sheer scale of the Roman baking operation. The concept of large-scale professional bakeries designed to feed an entire urban population was a Roman innovation that laid the groundwork for modern bakeries and food distribution systems. Before Rome, much of bread making was a household chore. The Romans industrialized it, making the baker a specialist and a vital part of the economy. This professionalization of a basic necessity is a mainstream historical fact that profoundly shaped the development of urban life. Historians still argue Whether the centralized bread dole in Rome, the annona, spurred, or merely adapted to the existing large-scale bakery infrastructure, consider the equipment. The basic design of the Roman oven, with its large stone chamber heated by wood, remained largely unchanged for well over 1,000 years in many parts of Europe. Even today, traditional artisan bakeries often use ovens based on very similar principles, emphasizing the enduring effectiveness of ancient engineering. The long-handled peel, the kneading troughs, these simple, robust tools proved their worth across millennia. A quirky detail is that the segmented Roman loaf, often with 8 divisions, has been found in archaeological sites and is thought by some to be an early precursor to designs that later influenced various forms of bread throughout Europe, a subtle visual legacy baked into history. The emphasis on different types of bread, from coarse wholemeal to refined white bread, also highlights a culinary hierarchy that persisted. The desire for whiter, finer bread as a status symbol continued for centuries, often at the expense of nutritional value. This Roman preference wasn't just a fleeting trend, it became deeply embedded in European culinary traditions. So, when you see a pristine white baguette in a Parisian bakery today, you're inadvertently touching upon a legacy that stretches all the way back to the Roman pistrinum. Furthermore, the social organization of bakers into powerful guilds or collegia also left its mark. These associations influenced the development of craft guilds in the Middle Ages and beyond, establishing precedents for professional standards, training, and collective bargaining. The idea of a skilled trade being organized and protected with its own rules and hierarchy owes a significant debt to Roman precedents. You can almost hear the echoes of Lucius's guild meetings in the distant future. Ultimately, the daily life within a Roman baker's shop was far more than just making bread. It was a microcosm of Roman ingenuity, social structure, and enduring cultural impact. It reminds us that even the simplest, most fundamental aspects of daily existence can carry profound historical weight, connecting us directly to the lives of those who came before. From the first grind of the millstone to the final, steaming loaf, the rhythms of the Roman bakery helped shape the very foundations of the Western world.